they've always been here. They love humanity. That's what they both agree on, right? Like they both agree that they like living amongst people. They like drinking tea and doing all these things.
And Talisker.
Yeah, and Talisker, exactly. And like I love that about them. It makes them so endearing to me, and it makes them feel like they're ours. Like as humans, it's like these are our angel and demon. The rest of them all suck, but these are our two.
Welcome, friends, to episode 277 of the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book and then see the movie. I'm filmmaker James Bailey.
And I'm writer Luke Elliott.
And this week, we discuss Neil Gaiman's 2023 series, Good Omens 2. So, returning to Good Omens, this is, I think the second time we've done a project like this because of a sequel. It was one that we've done. We covered the book and then covered the first movie, and then eventually they did an It Part 2, and we just returned to the movie. So here we are returning to just Part 2 of Good Omens as an adaptation. But we do have all the knowledge from the book. It's been quite a few years now, but we do recommend you go back and check out those episodes. They're actually very popular. So, I recommend them. It's still one of my favorite projects that we've covered.
Yeah, some of our most popular, honestly. They've done really well. That's one of the reasons why when Good Omens 2 was announced, I was like, all right, well, we're definitely doing it. I actually went back and listened to all of our coverage recently, so I will have that kicking around in my memory. It's from 2019, a whole pandemic ago.
Crazy.
It was another time.
Totally different world.
At the end of our coverage, we talk about the prospects of a Good Omens 2. So I thought that would be interesting to revisit here at the top.
Sure.
We basically said that there was some rumors going around. There were some people theorizing. There were some things they did within Good Omens, one that looked like they were leaving the door open. But Neil Gaiman had said he didn't intend to ever showrun again because he was like, I think I'm just going to be a writer from now on. That was really hard. I don't ever want to do that again. So we were both like, well, if he's not going to showrun, it would be changing hands to somebody else. That feels weird. We had some misgivings. Ultimately, you said basically you didn't think that it should happen, that they should leave it alone. Not go to a second season. I was a little more open to it.
Shame on me, right? What's wrong with me?
Yeah, well, I wanted to check in and see how you feel about it now that it is a thing, and how open are you to it?
Yeah. So as we started this season, I was still kind of skeptical, but I shouldn't have been, right? Neil Gaiman is still at the helm. He co-wrote the book. He understands the material better, as good as Terry Pratchett did, and better than anyone else that's still living. And he has remember
all notes, I assume. I didn't do a ton of research into it, but I know that they had started writing a second book. There was notes for a sequel, so he's going off of stuff that Pratchett wrote that was never released. Yeah,
so with all of those things in mind, I think I was just so happy with how that first season turned out that I didn't want to necessarily continue it without any material. I've looked into it a little bit now, especially with how many years have gone by. And yes, they did work on material. They had ideas, and they were planning a possible sequel leading up until Terry Pratchett's unfortunate death in 2015. So all of that in mind, and then going into the first 3 episodes of this series so far, I'm like, it's Neil Gaiman's voice, Terry Pratchett. You can still feel some of Terry Pratchett's influence there.
Yeah.
They're doing a lot of good things to recapture the magic. The cast is almost the same across the board. They brought everybody back. I'm loving it. It has me giddy. I'm laughing a lot. I love these characters. I love the way they interact, and the humor. It's so witty, so clever. I can't get over it. It's so much fun to watch more. So yeah, my answer to the question is I'm glad it's back.
Yeah, me too, man. I mean, these guys are a warm hug, right? It's just so nice to return to Aziraphale and Crowley. Our good friends, right? Check back in on them, see how they've been, catch up with them. How are they doing these days? I was just in for it for that, and it's really doesn't matter what they're doing. I'm interested.
Totally.
It's kind of a mystery plot this time, centering around Gabriel. We've only seen the first 3 episodes, so we can't spoil anything beyond that, but we'll try and kind of stick to them as we go. But just briefly, the setup is Gabriel shows up, and he can't remember who he is. He's naked. Shows up at Aziraphale's bookshop, and they end up calling him Jim. And I thought it was really fun because what we talked about with John Hamm and how he was a massive fan of the book series, And Neil Gaiman wrote to him and said, hey, will you come play a character who's not in this book series named Gabriel? Because all the angels and demon stuff, a lot of that was added, if you remember. Not everything, but a lot of that was added material. And supposedly that was what a lot of book 2 was going to be about. And it seems like they're definitely leaning into that. That's like the focus of this series so far to me. And he was excited just to be a part of the project. And I thought it's cool to see him now be a more central character than he was in the first season.
Yeah, he's great. I love John Hamm. Really, I gotta just like give all our shout outs up front. I love Neil Gaiman's material. Love John Hamm. I think he's great, especially getting more material here. He's very like a character an actor that everybody knew from Mad Men, and then showing his comedic chops over the years. We've seen many of comedic moments, but it's so fun to see him in this role. He's totally game for it. And then, of course, you have David Tennant as Crowley. Unbelievable performance. I love David Tennant. He's like one of my favorite working actors from things like Doctor Who, obviously, but then like Broadchurch and some of his other roles that he's had. He's
Jessica Jones.
Yeah, all the way across the board, I've loved everything I've seen him in.
Such a creep in that.
Yeah, and to be a Doctor Who fan and know like to see the 10th Doctor and just like know that the 10th Doctor is coming back actually pretty soon to be a part of Doctor Who again, so that's fun. And then Michael Sheen as Aziraphale, like I got to talk about this anecdote now. Neil Gaiman was writing the screenplays for these episodes, and we may have mentioned this in the first season's coverage, but he started thinking about who should play Crowley, who he thought could handle the role. And he was friends with Michael Sheen, and he thought of Michael Sheen as Crowley. And up until the third episode, when he writes a scene where Crowley's walking down the aisle of a church, and then like he's walking as if it's hot sand on a beach, and he's like his feet are on fire because it's like holy land or whatever. And he was like, I kind of see David Tennant doing this a little more, like the physicality of it and stuff. So he kind of went that way with it, and then had this awkward dinner with Michael Sheen, where Neil Gaiman didn't realize that Michael Sheen also kind of felt like he wanted to do Aziraphale. They both were having this long dinner where they were trying to build up the courage to tell the other one. And at the end of the dinner, they're both like, oh, that's what you were. Oh, and they kind of had this like this realization moment. So everything worked out for the best, and each actor ended up in the role that I think suits them really well.
That's funny. We didn't talk about that specifically, but there was a lot of talk about them as their specific roles, and how they said that if this was something they did as a stage show, they would do nights where they would play each other's role. Yeah. They thought that would be really fun. And I was thinking like it would have been kind of fun to open up the season with them playing each other's roles. It would have completely confused the audience. They would have no idea what was going on. So I see why they didn't do it, but you could almost see them trying it with how like sort of self-aware and fun the show is. Like it kind of knows it's playing games.
Or if they like had like a body switch episode or something where they did have a chance to play each other.
If you remember the end of season 1, we did have that. They got each other's punishments. They swapped into each other's bodies to be able to withstand the punishments.
That's like, what it was. Yeah.
He got dipped in holy water, and it was because it was actually Aziraphale in Crowley's body.
Yeah,
Crowley's body. I think I got corrected recently on a comment, so I'll try and
Crowley. Yeah,
Crowley.
It's difficult. We're not very British, but we'll try. Crowley, yeah, and Aziraphale. Yeah, it's funny that you say that because I watched a panel that Gaiman and McKinnon, who's the director for all of the episodes we've seen of Good Omens, season 1 and all of season 2, and a producer named Rob Wilkins, who I wasn't familiar with previously, but in hearing him speak at the panel, apparently was so close to Terry Pratchett's work and was a friend of Terry Pratchett that people actually refer to him as the voice of Terry Pratchett on Earth. Like that's kind of like this like joke that they have running. So he's an executive producer who kind of like weighs in as far as Terry Pratchett's voice is concerned in ways, which is I find to be really fascinating. And so like having these three talk, and I think a few of the actors were there as well, and Neil Gaiman mentioned that he would love to still somehow write a play and have them swap roles. So that's still something he's out there telling everybody.
So you were at a panel that Neil Gaiman was on?
I watched a panel online from New York Comic Con, yeah. Because
I knew you were just at some Comic-Con type
I went to Tampa
recently,
Bay
right?
Comic-Con, yeah.
Okay. I wasn't sure. Maybe
Separate.
They did one there.
That would be cool, but no, not this time. It is the season of the Comic-Con, right? Like right at summertime, so.
Well, I also wanted to bring that back to another thing. At the very start of our coverage, I asked you like which one of us was which character, and you ended up going with Crowley, and I said I would be Aziraphale. I felt like, in the spirit of the switching, we switch it up for these final 2 episodes, and I'll take on the mantle of Crowley, and you can be Aziraphale.
Sure. I wore white.
You're
today
wearing white today
in anticipation. So. Yeah, so there we go. It's funny. Like I think everybody feels like they have a little bit of both, right?
Sure. Yeah, of course.
A little angel on their shoulder, a little devil on their shoulder. So that's where I'm at. I think it's funny to think back to me in 2019 being like, I'm like Crowley. But I'm here to say that like I think it's probably your life would probably be a lot more fun if your life was like Aziraphale's. I just want to talk about for people who maybe didn't listen to our first season's coverage, which I do recommend that you do, but like a refresher for me as well. In 1989, a year before the completed novel was published, Gaiman and Pratchett visited the U.S. for the World Fantasy Convention in Seattle, and they shared a hotel room to save money. Unable to sleep at night due to jet lag and not having anything else to talk about, they started plotting out the sequel to Good Omens.
That's serendipitous. I literally just booked my ticket to World Fantasy this year.
Nice. Are you going to possibly be staying with somebody to save money in a hotel room?
Could happen.
There you go. You're going
We'll see.
Write a hit novel in that, or at least come up with the idea.
I do know some other writers who are going.
There you go. So 668, The Neighbor of the Beast, was slated as the sequel's title, but after Gaiman moved to the United States, Pratchett expressed doubt that a sequel would be written. Gaiman later affirmed this in one of his essays, titled Terry Pratchett: An Appreciation. Pratchett died in 2015. In 2017, Gaiman revealed as part of the filming of the television series based on the book that he and Pratchett had done some plotting for the sequel, including that, quote, there would have been a lot of angels in the sequel, one of whom was Gabriel, who was briefly mentioned in Good Omens, but was figured more prominently in the TV show. When asked if Neil had any plans on releasing a sequel to Good Omens or maintaining its status as a standalone work, Gaiman stated that there was a plot for one that Pratchett wanted to be told, but whether or not it would be made would depend on certain factors. So obviously now we're here. It's never going, as far as I can tell, it won't be released as a novel, but we're getting the continuation of the story and possibly some of the elements that Terry Pratchett himself worked on alongside Neil Gaiman. So I just think, and I do remember from our previous years years ago coverage, Terry Pratchett's dying wish to Neil Gaiman was to try to get Good Omens adapted.
Yes.
And to carry the flame for someone like that, I have so much respect for Neil Gaiman and I love his work, but to see a friendship like that, to see him seeing this to completion, being a showrunner again for season 2 and like kind of having that full circle completed, like I think that's so cool. And it's it's the magic of storytelling that we can still have some sort of connection with Terry Pratchett with new material in that way.
Yeah. And we talked about this last time, and I think there was a bit of a debate at the end of our final episode about, is it kind of a betrayal to produce this second season? And I think we've kind of outlined the reasons why it's not, but I think that's also why there's not going to be a second book, because to me, Pratchett's contribution is directly as a book, right? And the adaptation is always going to be separate in a way. From its early stages, it was always Neil Gaiman. So it feels better to me to like continue the show but leave the book as a standalone thing. Like the book is always now going to be a standalone thing, and I think that feels appropriate to me, since it would feel weirder for Neil Gaiman to come out and release the sequel. To
see an adaptation process like this as well, we talk about this all the time, weekly, honestly, for the last 5 or 6 years. So the idea of seeing someone write a novel alongside someone else and then go on and be a showrunner and head writer of every episode of the show, to see the level of control that Neil Gaiman has over this, and then to hear his voice and his sense of humor in the dialogue and in the scenes, and the way that the show is funny, but it's not like cracking jokes in your face. It's just like situationally funny. It's so clever. Yeah. And I love it for that. And it's really an interesting analysis on adaptation here, because it's like he had to kind of be in this position in his career to be able to even do this, right? Like to have the sort of cachet to be like, no, I'm going to show run this thing myself. I don't think studios would be signing off on many authors to do that. Right. And we talked about in our previous coverage how they were kind of writing the novel simultaneously. They would write like different scenes and alternate how they were writing it, kind of sending notes to each other. We went into a lot of it. Yeah. It was very blended. Thinking about that, I think that they're like the ownership of this novel is, I think people want to say like now that Neil Gaiman has run with it for such a long time and he's adapted it, like it's Neil Gaiman's Good Omens, but it's always, I think what's cool is that Neil Gaiman's always doing it in service of Terry Pratchett and his voice, and I'm sure he has like that Terry Pratchett voice in his head, trying to balance that out and do good by him. So this is probably a good time to move into episode 1, which is called The Arrival. All these episodes are directed by Douglas McKinnon, and shout out to him as well, because I think he has a really good sense of what's going on in the story. And I think that he brings a lot to this as well. As much as Neil Gaiman's voice is here, Douglas McKinnon's doing a lot to work alongside the actors and bring the vision to life. And I think it is a fun one and interesting visually in ways that TV shows often struggle with. Like, he does some cool effects, and it looks a little hokey sometimes, but almost by design. Like when Crowley's car is driving down the road, it's like meant to look kind of weird and janky because he's like breaking the laws of physics almost or something.
Yeah.
So
well,
it's
also
kind
we
of
talked
cool.
about in our last coverage that the Bentley, I think it is, that they had could only go 30 miles an hour. So in order to make it look like it's going fast, they have to like do a sped up thing to make it look like that.
Yeah, well, it's working. I think it's cool. It gives kind of a visual texture to this show that makes it feel unique. McKinnon has worked alongside David Tennant quite a bit as well, because he directed a few episodes of Doctor Who, and I think he joked on the panel that I was listening to from New York Comic Con about how he believes that he is the director who's worked with David Tennant the most, so he knows him very well, and I think it's really cool to see them working together. Anyway, episode 1 is called The Arrival, directed by Douglas McKinnon, written by Neil Gaiman and John Finnemore. In the beginning, the angel Crowley creates the universe, but grows deeply disappointed when the angel Aziraphale informs him that his creation is intended merely for the entertainment of humans and will be destroyed in 6,000 years. In modern times, the archangel Gabriel arrives naked and without any memories to Aziraphale's shop, carrying only a large box with a fly inside. Meanwhile, up in heaven, Gabriel has disappeared, and both heaven and hell are eager to find him. Aziraphale and Crowley perform a miracle to hide Gabriel from heaven and hell, but accidentally tip off heaven to the location of Gabriel.
So we started off again with another bit of creation. This time it is more of like a cosmological, like we're creating the universe, whereas last time it was Garden of Eden. And it provides a kind of an interesting, like, mirrored story. It's a little different, kind of counter in some ways. I love, the whole thing where Crowley's like creating this universe and he's so proud of what he's done. And he's still an angel at this point. And he's like, look at this is great. And then, Aziraphale shows up with the bad news about how this is all in service to humans who just are going to look up at it and be like, well, look how pretty that is.
Yeah. These
so
kinds
funny.
of scenes are why I love the show too. Like, we're getting to see the creation of the universe and the way that it's playing with the clever joke, and the way that, like, if you see it from the perspective of gods, angels, and demons, everything seems like it's kind of for nothing. We get into it with the Job story as well. It's like, it's God has a plan, God's word, and everything's according to his plan. But then it's like, sometimes it's like, well, what's the motivation here? Like, how does that benefit anybody other than like himself, or what does it mean?
That was a big thing in the first season too, with the flood, like Aziraphale has to, struggle with the idea that God's going to like murder all these children and people and innocents. And then he's like, but they're going to give him a rainbow at the end.
I love these scenes.
It's funny that he at some point falls, right? Because he's an angel here, but in the Garden of Eden, he's already a demon.
Right.
So questioning, he's like asking questions at the end of this, and he's like, it can't be too bad to ask some questions, right? And Aziraphale looks at him like, That was the big sort of reveal here, is that it's like, what does it mean to question? And I just want to talk about it. I'm sure that we touched on some of this in our coverage back then, but the idea of free will. And so if this is all according to God's plan and all that other stuff, it's all predetermined. But he's created characters in Aziraphale and Crowley that have free will. Crowley first, and then Aziraphale expresses more of that as time goes on. And does that mean it's all according to his plan? I think that's how the show cleverly tries to say it, and that's how I think religious people would say as well. It all ties back together as anything you do is God's plan, even though that you feel that you have some agency. And that's what Crowley and Aziraphale are doing here. And even when it comes to like Job or the flood, things like that, to jump ahead to the Job stuff, they turn the children into lizards instead of murdering his kids. And then they bring them back, and then they make it seem like it's like new children. And in that way, like,
the lessons are learned, I guess, quote unquote, but still Aziraphale and Crowley are like making the world a better place. And, and then they all explain it as God's plan.
It really underlines for me how, and this is true in the last book, in the book itself, I guess, and is true in the first season. But this is really underlining for me how much Aziraphale and Crowley have affected human history and the way humanity has come up. And they have been the sort of like the only angel and demon that are like truly on humanity's side. And they've like been here all along and like lived through it with us in a way that otherwise heaven and hell doesn't. They're so distant and disconnected from it. They don't really know what's going on. They don't understand how humans live. Whereas like they've always been here. They love humanity. That's what they both agree on, right? Like they both agree that they like living amongst people. They like drinking tea and, doing all these things.
And Talisker.
Yeah, and Talisker, exactly. And like I love that about them. It makes them so endearing to me, and it makes them feel like they're ours. Like as humans, it's like these are our angel and demon. The rest of them all suck, but these are our two.
Yeah. They also like pit themselves against the rest of the angels and stuff, and like everybody, and which is kind of why I like that we're now getting in the third episode we're getting an angel that doesn't seem like they're inherently bad. Where because like up to this point, all the angels and all the demons have seemed like just straight up evil, other than Crowley and Aziraphale. And I don't know what the commentary being made there is, but I don't think it's great for religion in general.
And we noticed this in the last one. It's like heaven's almost just as bad as hell, and I think that they're definitely saying something there. It's just like
organized
they're very
religion.
Self-righteous and unwilling to. They're unyielding and don't see any nuance in anything, and they're kind of assholes because of that. Totally what they're playing at there. So speaking of the setup, we already touched on John Hamm showing up naked. I definitely noticed the fly. It flies out very prominently. They even mention it another time later. We, as of yet, don't know what the fly is. It seems to me like this is going to be maybe a character who's going to pop up.
It's so clearly connected to Beelzebub to me. Like, there's no way it couldn't be, right?
But didn't we see Beelzebub in this at one point? And it's got a new face now, and like... So you're thinking Beelzebub is maybe not letting on everything that they know?
Some sort of spy, something like that related to Beelzebub.
Could be, or another demon. Maybe just like demons in general. Like could be another demon that is connected to a fly.
Probably has to do with
the devil.
Something, I think Gabriel got up to something. Yeah.
One of the interesting things is like in the first book is all about an apocalypse surrounding this like swap of a baby, right?
Antichrist.
Like mix up, and we have the Antichrist, and it's Adam instead of Warlock, and it's this like foretold end of days that is going to come when the Antichrist arrives, and they have to stop it to save humanity. And we know from the jump that that's the looming threat. But here it's just a mystery. It's like, why is Michael here? He doesn't remember anything. It seems like it's probably significant and probably really bad.
Yeah, Gabriel, right?
So it's a very different feel, but it's kind of cool that they didn't go right back to the well of the same kind of setup, and they instead went with this slightly more mystery-oriented thing.
I think in my, when I said I was kind of hoping they wouldn't do any more and kind of leave it lying, I assumed that they would, like you said, go back to the well, bring back the Antichrist in some way, kind of rehash some of the story. I like that it's very disconnected in that way.
I kind of don't think we're going to see the Antichrist at all. Maybe a cameo. Maybe Adam will show up for something, but I'm curious to see how many, because there's so many sub-characters. That was one of the things listening back to our coverage. I was like, wow, I forgot how many characters were in this thing. I'm wondering how many of them we will see again. Because we've seen a lot of the heaven and hell types, right? But not a lot of the people who were on Earth. Like there was like witch, there was, prophets, there were witch hunters, there were all kinds of human characters that so far haven't shown up.
So you make a great point too, just in I talked before about how like they brought back most of the cast. I don't just mean John Hamm, David Tennant, and Michael Sheen. They brought back Madame Tracy. Miranda Richardson, who played Madame Tracy, now plays Shax, who is the new demon that's replaced Crowley on Earth.
Okay.
And then Sister Mary Loquacious from the original series is Nina, who owns the coffee shop.
Oh, okay.
So they've taken the actors, brought them back in new roles.
The faces are familiar.
Yeah. So and then the other one is Sister Teresa Garrulus is Maggie, who is the record shop owner.
Okay. Yeah. And we got to talk about that because there was a line, she was getting so much flack, and there's, I think it's the coffee shop owner, Nina, who says, nobody buys records anymore. What are you doing trying to sell those? And I just felt you being like, no.
Yeah.
You've been collecting them, right? Vinyl?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I think that there's
and you're not
something...
alone. People do it.
No, it's huge. It's like growing and growing and growing in popularity for sure.
Yeah.
Again, but I think it's, I love tactile. I like physical media. I like to have the thing so that I know it's never going to go anywhere.
Yeah.
So
a lot of that shit's just disappearing.
Yeah. So like holding on to the things that I love, and just there's something, I love the physical nature of like putting a record on. So, and I don't think you're ever going to get away from that. It's like a way to like, rather than pushing a button, you're getting to like interact with the art in ways and stuff. So I just thought
it was funny how much they were like hammering home that this is a dead medium and no one uses it anymore.
Yeah, and it's Gaiman saying like that's a ridiculous point of view, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, this is a man who writes longhand in like leather-bound journals and stuff, right?
He introduces a character that owns a record shop. Like, I don't think he's I think he's for records. And so, it's cool that it comes back around too in the story in the way that like the clue, which brings me back to the Gabriel stuff I wanted to mention. Gabriel, I think if I was to theorize, I think Gabriel got up to some hijinks with a demon or something like that, and that sort of created a rift in that specific bar. Something went down in that bar, I think, between Gabriel and some other entity, and it somehow blocked his memories and all that other stuff. So we'll see where it's going, but
yeah, I mean, I guess we did get a scene, like a flash of Beelzebub acting strange and saying something like, wouldn't it be nice if someone told you were doing a good job? Remember that?
Yeah.
And I was like, what is this scene? Maybe that's a hint that like maybe it was Beelzebub and like Beelzebub doesn't remember something too.
That would be cool. Yeah. And then, characters have asked Beelzebub why they're acting differently in ways and stuff as well. Why are you being so nice or whatever? So I think we're onto something there. And then the Fly, obviously, with the package that he delivered. Like I think we're seeing some of what's going on here.
Yeah.
So the other thing that happens in the first episode is they perform the miracle, which I think that's fun to think about them performing half a miracle and half a miracle.
Let's just do a little half miracle. Yeah. It'll be completely under the radar, and then it's like massive, right?
Right.
Because their power combined is actually probably way more powerful than either of them would have been on their own.
And I know that the fan fiction's out there. We probably even touched on it in our previous coverage, but like the love story that's going on between these two people is so potent and evident.
That's in my notes of something to bring back up, because in our episode we had a pretty lengthy conversation about it, and how in the books it said that because they are an angel and a demon, they like don't have reproductive organs, and they are like sexually attracted to people. So we were kind of like, well, that's one argument for just having it be sort of a platonic friendship that is very deep. But how the new adaptation felt like an opportunity maybe to lean into the representation of it and have it actually be a romance. And how when it became clear when we finished the series, they didn't really quite to do that. They hinted at it. There's a lot of hinting at it, but they never quite went that far. We ultimately felt like it was like a pretty appropriate to like still stay true to the source material and how they set it up. And then still sort of honor that what seems like a romance. But I wanted to bring it up again because I wanted to ask you, because I have my own theory, do you think it will be confirmed as romantic in Good Omens 2?
I do, yeah. So I think that the parallels that the parallels they're drawing with Nina and Maggie are evident to me. They're like they're showing these two people that don't necessarily see that there's like some attraction and other stuff going on. Maybe there's some obstacles in the way. And I think we're gonna get a parallel with our two main leads here, which I love. Like I think that was something that a massive section of the fan base wanted as well. Yeah. So if it comes to fruition, I'd be pretty stoked.
So I also think that it can serve as the final sign of them going fully embracing humanity and saying like, we're going to lean into the fact that this is a romantic love, and that would be the most human thing they could do. And so I think, if we're going to really put a bow on this thing and take it further, that's the ultimate sign of humanity. So I'm going to be a little disappointed if they don't confirm it, honestly, at this point.
I think we're leading to it. So I don't know that we'll be disappointed. You're getting to see like Crowley try to understand love moment, like the moment where he's trying to make it rain on them to get under the awning.
Oh my gosh, just get him under an awning if it's raining. If it was raining, would you go under an awning? It's a really great. Funny question.
Another just like great, awesome like knowledge drop that Gaiman's doing throughout Good Omens season 2 so far is the Jane Austen references.
That's in the next episode. Do we want to let's get to the next episode. We've already touched on a lot of what's in there, but let's get into it.
Yeah, so episode 2 is called The Clue. In 2500 BC, God sends Job horrific disasters intended to test Job's faith. Hell sends Crowley to carry out the destruction of everything Job loves. Aziraphale, feeling pity for him, is horrified by the prospect of destroying Job's children, and he and Crowley trick the angels into thinking that Job's children are dead. In reality, they are alive, but temporarily hidden in the form of lizards. Both Aziraphale and Crowley had to cover up their reemergence to Gabriel and the archangels with him by having Job's kids pose as some of the kids that God promised Job. Aziraphale feels great guilt for thwarting the will of God and wonders if he did the right thing. In the present, Aziraphale is visited by Michael, Uriel, and Serachale upon tracing a miracle here. Beelzebub offers to drop the hostility towards Crowley in exchange for the information on where Gabriel is.
Yeah, so this was my favorite of the 3 episodes we watched. I really liked the Job stuff. I thought it was very reminiscent of the kinds of little stories that we would get in the first season. I like it whenever I get a chance to see them bust out some like really ostentatious costuming, especially for Crowley. Yep. He was so funny, and then like him being the shoeite or whatever was really funny, and then that came back into play where he's the shoemaker from Shua. It's very funny. Yep. And then the whole thing where he's like blasting all the goats, and you can see it's at a certain point in their relationship, right? And he's like, how can you do this? And then he sees that he's actually transformed them all into these crows. And you just see like they're telling this love story because Aziraphale gives him this look like he's falling in love with him, like, and that's just something we see time and again. Yeah, and like we saw that little wing raise right at the start too, right? Like. Mm-hmm. It's definitely mutual between the two of them. There's care there. Really touching stuff. Really funny too with Gabriel and his. I love the bit where it was like, I've seen a birth before. Yeah, I know how it works. And he's literally talking about the Garden of Eden.
Yeah,
and he's like, and then Aziraphale brings it up, and he's like, well, Gabriel has seen a birth before in the Garden of Eden, so he knows how it goes. Let's show him again. And they get the ribs, the big giant ribs out, and he's like, yep, that looks right to me.
That's how it goes.
He can come out any age, and he's like, yes, confirmed.
And we're getting to see Aziraphale lean into some of the what humanity has to offer, like by eating that entire, all of
it's him getting tempted, food, right? Because that's the other thing is he keeps getting tempted by Crowley. Yeah.
And I do love that in the present, they are like both kind of banished from heaven and hell in ways. Like they're kind of like banished to earth.
Well, they're considered weird. They're like, they've gone native. They're like, they don't blend in anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like seeing it too. And like, they're like enticing them back in ways. And they're like, why would we want anything but this? This is great. So to talk about the story of Job and how fucking crazy that story is.
I love that this kind of highlights how fucking weird a lot of like Old Testament shit is.
It's brutal, man. And it's like, this makes a ton of great points about like, oh, so what's the reasoning here? Like, why are we going through the process of doing
it's a bet. Satan.
Yeah. And then
I don't think it says that it's a bet, but I don't know. I haven't read the Old Testament in a long time.
Oh yeah. I don't
it feels like a certain interpretation of it.
I think it kind of is though. I think it's like a test. It's definitely a test that they're trying to see. So whether you consider that a bet or not, I think it is.
Well, 3 kids are going to get murdered. We'll give them 7 more. Yeah. Not resurrecting the 3 that died is that's a pretty bizarre way to go about it.
Yeah. We both have talked about openly in the podcast like where we are not religious people. Right. I was raised religious. I think you were as well. Same. And we both are no longer
raised Catholic.
Yeah, I was raised just Christian. So
interesting. Generic Christian.
Methodist technically.
Methodist, yeah.
I am now agnostic, so that's good context for everybody when we're talking about this stuff. So nothing against religious people inherently. The system I have experienced, and we'll move on from that. So what I wanted to talk about really though was Gabriel in the library sorting books by the first letter of the first sentence, and how we keep getting like huge drops of like not just Jane Austen, but also like tons of other really, really famous books. We're seeing books on the shelves, and I just love Gaiman getting to highlight some of these works.
Definitely an author playing a little bit there. Yeah, like figuring out who he can include.
Yeah,
and we get the other thing is like I didn't confirm, but we saw a bit of the shelf that has all these books lined up, and we saw a bunch of titles. I assume he actually figured out these books all start with the letter I.
I thought
put
so
them
too.
in that order too.
Yeah, I thought so too. And I noticed some. There were some really cool ones in there, like 1984, and there's just some great books that are all lined up there. Things we need to mention right here, though. Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice is being read at the beginning of Pride and Prejudice.
One of our past projects.
Yeah, put back on the shelf. And then Gabriel pulls another book off, starts reading it, and it's the opening line of Good Omens. It was a nice day. So I think that's pretty cool, because that's like, so I was wondering if Gabriel was going to read that whole book and like hear his name mentioned and be like, wait, is this all of what's going on here?
I think that might have just been a little bit of an Easter egg, but
it probably was.
Yeah.
It was a really emotional moment too, if you caught it, because it was like the score rises some, and I think it's a moment for Terry. I think it's like a moment for them to talk about, like, I mean, it's such a nice sentiment too. It was a really nice day to start a book that's about like this huge, massive apocalypse story, but ultimately like what makes it so charming, and to like have that moment for him to read it. And I think John Hamm's Gabriel says something along the lines of like, now this is more like it, or this is the good start to the book, and he like puts it back. I just thought that we had to mention that one. And then Jane Austen, I think he might be seeding in some of like Jane Austen's history that not anybody else knows about. It's either that, or he's taking some massive liberties with like saying,
well, I mean, he says that she was a spy and like a
thief and all this stuff. Like, is that? I assume that's not real, but
I don't think that's real, but who knows?
I don't know. Crowley would know. Maybe Gaiman has some inside information.
And then Crowley's like, oh, and she also wrote books? Man, humans never cease to amaze me.
So funny.
Yeah, it's just, I think it's honestly just speaking to how much of a badass Jane Austen was, which is definitely true.
Totally.
As we talked about her, biography in our coverage of Pride and Prejudice. And then I think we maybe touched in again on Emma, because we have done a couple Jane Austen books now. And yes, I was delighted to like get the references to some of that stuff now.
Same.
Always fun.
Let's talk a little bit about like the parts of heaven we've seen, the parts of hell we've seen. They do a good job of making hell seem like the DMV, but dirty and like nasty.
I love that. Yeah, you're right.
Which is awesome.
It's like everybody's in lines everywhere, it seems like.
Yeah. Heaven is like just like a boardroom or something.
Just
like
a boardroom, yeah.
With like
all
a view
white
and stuff. And you're like, that's not my heaven. And I hope that hell is cooler than that. At least like I get why it would be torturing people, and in covering a book like this and a story like this in general, it being Neil Gaiman's, I was almost getting Sandman like mixed into some of the lore when I was trying to remember back to Good Omens, some of the story, because like I was like, wait, was Gwendolyn Christie's Lucifer in this, or was that and then I'm remembering.
No, apparently it was the voice of Benedict Cumberbatch.
Was Satan?
That's what you told me. He did the voice of Satan at some point.
Did I mention who the voice of God was? Because I figured that out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Frances McDermott.
Yeah, which
perfect got her back, I assume.
Yes. Yeah.
I didn't recognize it, but that was an interesting scene, right? Where she's talking to Job, and then there's something where he like reports that she says, "Come back when you can make a whale."
Yeah.
Like if you're gonna criticize me, come back when you can make a whale.
God knows best, basically, is the idea behind
God is so distant in this series, and so is Satan, honestly. Both of them seem very distant from everything, and maybe that, I assume that's by design.
Their agents are kind of taking care of everything. It's Beelzebub, it's Gabriel, and then it's
But their agents don't know what they want.
No,
is what it seems like their agents.
Whereas, like, when we see the flashbacks with Aziraphale and Crowley, it seems like direct things that they're doing for Satan or God. You know what I mean? We're seeing, like, them
or is it being passed down through heaven and being passed up through through the pipeline so
I was thinking like the creation of the universe stuff, like which
I don't know, it doesn't really say. There is one moment at the end of this second episode where Aziraphale shows up on the beach and he's like defeated, and he's like, I'm ready, take me. Like he thinks he's going to become a demon now because he's lied. I think this is the first time he's lied. And Crowley's like, I'm not going to tell anybody. It's fine. And this is, again, like a little bit of that, like, eating away at their sort of principles. But I also like the reveal where Crowley says, or he had previously said it wasn't lonely. when he described his existence to Aziraphale, and Aziraphale said, like, I thought you said it wasn't lonely. And he's like, well, I'm a demon, so I lie.
I lied, yeah.
Implying that it is lonely. Again, like, well, at least they have each other now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Again, there's always been plenty of fuel for this, but I just feel like they're building that, and I hope that's what they're doing.
Definitely. I'm going to be really interested to see what they do with Nina and Maggie going forward. Like, their story's clearly not even close to finished. We're going to get to see them get together, obviously. Like, Nina's in a toxic relationship. They seem kind of right for each other. And I'm just curious, like, what role they'll play going forward. And ultimately, we don't know a ton because of just where we're at in the story. Like, it's a mystery. We have maybe some of the clues, but we don't have the sort of overarching themes. Yeah. So it'll be cool to see, like, where everybody ends up.
Yeah, and one general observation is that it feels like they are focusing more of the show just on Aziraphale and Crowley in a way that one of the criticisms I had of the first season when I listened back to our coverage was I felt like we spent a lot of time with a lot of side characters, and I wanted to spend more time with our main two. And it feels like in season 2, they're like, well, this is going to be mostly about them. We'll get a little bit of side characters here or there, but like the focus has been on these two. And I appreciate that, because that definitely is the draw of the show to me.
Totally the draw of the show. And these two performers in these roles, these are like career-defining roles, in my opinion. Like, these I will not, in the same way that I think of David Tennant as the 10th Doctor, I'm going to continue to think of him as Crowley. Yeah. Same thing for Sheen as Aziraphale. Like,
absolutely.
I will always have this as a point of reference, and they're just doing such a great job, and they're so entertaining. And their chemistry too, like the bickering that they have. And then some of the times when they're on the same side, it's so satisfying when you see them sort of like team up together, and it's kind of them against the world or by default, heaven and hell. I love it. It's so cool to see. So moving into episode 3, it's called I Know Where I'm Going. Heaven sends a junior angel, Muriel, who tries to blend in as a human constable. The pair trick Muriel into believing that Aziraphale enchanted a human woman into falling in love. In 19th century Edinburgh, Crowley and Aziraphale chance upon a poor girl, Elspeth, who robs graves and sells the corpses to doctors to make money to support herself and her friend Morag. Aziraphale believes this is wrong, and Crowley argues that the circumstances of Elspeth's life have pushed her to do bad things, and thus she cannot be judged harshly for trying to survive. Aziraphale sabotages her. However, after speaking with the doctor, who explains that he buys corpses to better study how to treat living humans, he changes his mind about Elspeth's deeds. Elspeth, Morag, Crowley, and Aziraphale go to a graveyard to try to dig up another corpse, but Morag accidentally triggers a lethal trap and is killed. After selling Morag's corpse to a doctor, Elspeth tries to die by poison, but Crowley drinks it instead, getting drunk, and encourages Elspeth to live a better life. In the present day, Aziraphale tries to investigate what happened to Gabriel.
I would say he got high.
Sure, yeah.
Off a laudanum, I think it was, or laudanum poison, or whatever it was. Mm-hmm. This is a fun episode. It feels a little bit like one of those, like, the ongoing adventures of these two. You know, there is some carryover to what's going on in present day, but it's like otherwise not super connected, other than like the familiarity of the graveyard and like memories of what had been going on there. I do like seeing again Aziraphale and how he came to question. It seems like we're leading a lot to Aziraphale and his questioning of heaven, and how he is looking at these situations and going like, it's not that simple. I love the reveal about how doctors in that time period did have to use bodies to practice on to try and understand anatomy. And how they had to resort to these methods because it was illegal to do that, and it was in this, like, in service of, trying to further medical knowledge. And we talked about this specifically in Frankenstein, because that's where a lot of that comes from. Right. That was like the practice of the time.
It had me thinking a lot about like where we are as a society, and the fact that there are people who are like anti-science in some ways and very holistic to the point that they're kind of going against what centuries of people like risked their lives and their reputations to gather this information, and now people are just turning their backs on it in really dumb ways. It had me thinking a lot about that, just because what like they're talking about, like people were robbing graves just to get cadavers to work on them, and the idea of he gives like a jar to Aziraphale at one point, the doctor does, And it's like, he's like, this is a tumor from like a young boy that I couldn't save. And in the way that like, these are the kind of medical things that had to be sorted out to get to where we are today. So, you know, there's a reason for a lot of the things that we do. And it's like tried and true. Some people live some hard lives so that we could have, you know,
Aziraphale has a pretty horrible take on the whole thing at first, where he's like, no, it doesn't matter if they're poor. They just have a greater chance to, you know, to rise above and show their worth. And it's like,
well, that's a take more on, you know, class with religion, with regard to religion. And that's a whole interesting topic. And
morality and like what people, I mean, I think Crowley and the show is making a point about what poverty does to people and how it drives people to do certain things.
Well, and how I just it's so like eye rolling where you get Aziraphale's point of view, which is this sort of religious, like traditional religious point of view, which is they have more opportunities to do the right thing, and you're like, that's just like, okay, great, that's really helpful.
Yeah, I think the show really shows how like ridiculous that is, and he learns. This is also coinciding with Aziraphale getting Crowley's car. Which was a funny little bit where he turns it yellow and he's like playing fun music, and then Crowley like calls him all mad and he's like, "What are you doing? I could feel you driving my car under the speed limit."
It's great. Neil Gaiman does this thing where like it's like within the bounds of your imagination, but he figured it out. Like these kinds of scenes, of course, these characters would have this sort of back and forth. He doesn't want to drive Crowley's car because it's going to drive it at 100 miles an hour and get there really fast. He wants to drive it because he got a license a couple hundred years ago or whatever. And you know, I love that it becomes like a reflection of him. It's like yellow with the snacks, the snacks for the road and everything. It's really fun.
And you know, there's this whole he has the bit in the graveyard where he's confronted and then he fixes the guy's phone. There's just a lot of little funny bits. But overall, this was like one of the shorter episodes, and it didn't feel like it moved the plot much. We find out one bit of information, and that's he goes to the actual pub, and he finds out that Gabriel was there at some point and is connected to this lodge of Masons, or the Freemasons is what I'm interpreting that as.
So you think that, from what I gather, Gabriel met with somebody in a different organization or in that organization?
I think the bartender, if he's to be believed, said that, well, he assumed that he was a member of the Freemasons, and he was meeting with some other members of the Freemasons. Now, maybe he was misinterpreting who they were. That's possible. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, curious if we're going to get some like Freemason stuff. If that makes it into here, I'll be interested to see.
The records all turning to I can't remember the name of the song right now. I could sing
Every
it.
Day, It's a Getting Closer. Whatever that song is. Yeah. Stuck in your head if you hear it enough times.
It's a great song. But between every record in the machine is turning to that. So that's obviously a huge clue. Aziraphale has kind of bridged that all together.
And
now.
An ominous clue, right?
Yeah.
That sounds like a countdown to me.
Totally. Yeah. And the way that we talked about it back in season 1 coverage, but Queen plays a big part in this.
It still says special thanks to Queen at the end of every episode.
Yeah, which is great, and I love that Queen is still making an appearance, and I think that was a book detail as well that they carried over into the show.
There was something about like music and Queen, and I can't remember exactly.
Crowley specifically, I think, liked Queen. But yeah, just who doesn't like Queen? It's cool to hear them in the show, and I think notoriously hard to get the rights to in your work in feature films and TV shows. So then like the Elspeth and the way that Crowley becomes like a giant and is like commanding her to like not kill herself. They give her money. I thought maybe she was going to open the bar with the money, and that was like how it was all going to tie back together. I don't
maybe
think
we'll
that's
find
really
out
what it
she
was.
did at some point.
Maybe. Everybody calls everybody we, which I think is just Edinburgh in that time period. I think Scotland. David Tennant is Scottish, so I think that was a way for them to tie his homeland into the fabric of this story.
I'm going to be going to Glasgow, however you say it, next year. So
you are?
Hopefully I'll get,
That's awesome.
That's the plan. I mean, fingers crossed. The plan is to go to Glasgow for Worldcon 2024.
Very cool. Well, you'll have to visit Edinburgh and then call people we
I'm not
whoever.
sure how far away the two are, but I mean, I would love to be able to get over to Edinburgh and see it.
Yeah.
One moment I wanted to point out was where I think they call Crowley Doctor again quite prominently here, which I assume is another Doctor Who nod, right? What do you think, Doctor? And I think he turns right to Crowley and says that.
That's a great point. Yeah, I didn't even catch that. That's awesome.
Just a couple of cool moments from this episode. I really enjoyed Muriel, this little angel who comes down, like you said, who's like, I mean, I call her little, she's not little, but she's like cute. She's like just like a fish out of water. She thinks she's doing this great job at her disguise, and she's like, I'm a constable, and then they're like, are you, or are you a sergeant? And she's like, I'm Sergeant Constable, and that's what she goes by. And like just the way Aziraphale and Crowley are playing with her is very funny to me.
Yeah.
And yeah, she's there in her like all white version of the cop outfit, and she's there to investigate the miracle. I'd be curious to see some more with this character because I thought she was fun.
I liked seeing her as well. Like I said, I think we finally get another angel who's not like inherently a dick. So that's cool
you're
to
right.
see.
She's actually a likable one.
Yeah.
And we get a few of those every now and then. There's some hints about this new demon. I think her name's Shax. She has some funny interactions with Crowley where she's like trying to like get the furnace working. Is she like living in his flat or something? Is that the implication?
Yeah, I think she's taken over like his role on Earth and stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting to see their interactions is fun. I'll be curious to see more of that. I like that we have a few side characters and we're like coming back to them, because one of the things that the first book does and the first show does, it's like it introduces new characters in like every freaking episode. And by the end, there's a million, like there's a huge cast. And so I think it's smarter, like if you're going into it knowing it's going to be a season of television, to like condense a little bit, focus a little more, spend a little more time with like a fewer number of side characters.
Yeah. I've just been really happy with this so far. I find myself smiling through the episodes. I laugh a lot. I'm just giddy when I get to see Aziraphale and Crowley like sort of interact in ways. So I've really been enjoying this, and I'm excited. It's hard to speculate. I was going to say maybe we speculate, but we kind of have been this whole episode. I think we're going to see, we've talked about many of the things, but I think we're going to see Aziraphale and Crowley sort of solidify their relationship. I think we're going to see same thing with Nina and Maggie. I think we're going to see, and somehow that's going to affect the plot as well.
Yeah.
And
our official prediction is that there's something with Beelzebub and Mike and Gabriel.
I think that's probably has some water
because that fly
hold some water.
Maybe that was who they're going to find out that Gabriel was meeting with Beelzebub.
Yeah, I particularly like the moments where Gabriel.
There could be another whole element or faction we haven't yet like met yet, or it's like someone from before who's going to get brought back. I could see a couple of familiar faces cropping back up again. I think there's room for that still.
Yeah, I like the moments when Gabriel like goes it back. He like his eyes turn purple and he kind of like gives a quote from his previous self, kind of.
Well, they said that he said words that is what God originally said. Like I was there when like something like talking about the dawn of time, and apparently that was like a quote from God that Gabriel was saying. Is that a clue in some fashion? Why is Gabriel quoting God?
Yeah. I don't know.
Maybe Gabriel had a direct communication with God of some kind, and that like has somehow blown his mind up.
Maybe. Well, and Job like could barely, and I don't know if it's just because he's a human and we have feeble minds, but Job like barely could hear what God was saying.
Yeah, he was like, yeah,
and then also funny. when Aziraphale and Crowley were like listening, it sounded like garbled and like unintelligible. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So also something to think about.
Yeah, really interesting, man. Yeah, it's hard to predict anything beyond that. We've already predicted what we can. So I think this is where we're going to leave these first 3 episodes. I'm excited for the next 3. I'm as you are listening to this, if you're listening to it on the day it comes out, I'm currently at the Futurescapes workshop, which is actually a virtual workshop. So I'm not anywhere other than here, but I'm attending it virtually, and it's pretty intensive as far as like time. So I'm pretty busy with this. So it ended up working out that we were kind of covering a show, not reading anything at the moment, and keeping it kind of light, keeping these episodes kind of short. If you like the idea of us also returning to a project from the past, we're going to be doing something similar later this year with Dune. I'm excited to see Dune 2, and that'll be another chance for us to revisit a project that we've already sort of put somewhat of a bow on and see how it is continued. I think that'd be super fun. If you enjoyed this episode and our coverage of Good Omens, maybe you forgot to leave us a rating and review last time. Now's your chance. Leave us a rating and review on whatever app you chose to listen on. If you're on YouTube, thank you for checking out our video version of this podcast, which we're now releasing full video. Make sure to like the video and subscribe, and try and get us up to 1,000 subscribers so that we can actually click that little monetization button on YouTube. That would be fun to do.
Yeah, and make sure to follow us on all social media platforms. Facebook, Twitter is what I'm going to continue to call it, and Instagram. We're also on TikTok, and like Luke said, we're on YouTube. Check out our YouTube shorts, our full episodes, and engage with us on there. We like to hear what you have to say. So this is kind of a give and take. So yeah, definitely let us know what you think.
And if you'd like to support this podcast in another way, we do have a Patreon, which we just released another bonus episode on. And that was our coverage of the 2023 version of Mario, the Super Mario Brothers film that just came out. We had covered the 90s one just a few months ago, and now we're covering this one. We get to compare the two, talk about what worked for us and what didn't. It was a fun little episode, and we have that, and also the ability to vote on future projects. So check out our Patreon. It's patreon.com/inktofilm, and we'd love to have your support.
And thank you to Jeremy Blake for the use of our intro and outro music. It's the track Heaven and Hell.
All right, that's going to be it for this week, and we'll be back to finally put our final bow on Good Omens and see how it all wraps up. I'm both excited and a little bit worried and a little bit emotional feeling about it, but I'm looking forward to it.
It's possible we get a season 3, so if that does happen, maybe we will return. But
I can't imagine. But I've been so wrong in the past that clearly that means nothing. But let's revisit that question next week, and we'll know more. All right, until next time,
keep adapting.